A dear friend of mine, she shared this story with me recently about her 8-year-old son who one evening after brushing his teeth says to her, "Ima, what is that feeling you get when your heart is just going to jump out of your body and you have such a good feeling and you are so happy and you just don't know what to do because you are so happy?" She answered him, "Some people say that is God." "But if it is such a good feeling," he said, "why doesn't it last forever? It simply goes away too quickly." "Yes, it does," she said, "but our job in life is to create and find experiences that give us moments of a bursting heart." Our job in life is to create and find experiences that give us moments of a bursting heart. I want to share one such moment with you. Many years ago, traveling after college, I found myself trekking in the Himalayas on my way up to the base camp of Mount Annapurna, the 10th highest mountain in the world. I was traveling with Bob, a Jewish guy I had met previously in China, along with a few others. And with just a day away from reaching the top, I announced upon arriving at a tea house that we had stopped at for the night that I would not be joining the group the next day. I explained to the Hindi and the Buddhist amongst my group that evening began Yom Kippur, and I would be fasting and spending the day in prayer and meditation. Bob was incensed. "We are so close. How could you stop for a day?" The others were like, "Sure, Richard, we can do that. Sounds like an interesting way to spend a day. Tell us more about this holiday." So the next day was spent in reflection and prayer, song and friendship, surrounded by some of the most intense natural scenery in the world. What made the experience so powerful was the sense of community my friends created for me, a sacred container to hold my experiences, and my faith in mutual appreciation and affection. When we did finally make it to the top of the base camp, we woke up in the middle of the night to a sky parting with a full moon shining on the ice at the peak, making the whole mountain sparkle like diamonds from heaven. It was the most remarkable moment of my then 23 years of life. I distinctly remembering trying to rouse Bob from his sleep to come out and see it, but he didn't care. And the next day, he just wanted to begin our descent. As a side note, Bob was an inspiration for me to begin rabbinical school, but that's for another sermon. This, for me, was one of the most awe-inspiring moments that I've had in nature. The opportunity to frame the experience on the heels of a day of fasting and praying in the middle of Nepal with a group of people who bonded over this religious moment was an experience of Kedusha that I can still feel almost 40 years later. While at the time I couldn't articulate that experience in those terms, I know it was one of those rare moments of wonder. Not dissimilar, for all sorts of other reasons, than our own patriarch Jacob. Yaakov had such an experience when he, running away from home, fearing for his life, all alone in the vast wilderness of the desert, finds a rock and lays down to sleep. Here is how our biblical text describes that moment. Jacob left Beersheba and set out for Haran. He came upon a certain place. He stopped there for the night, for the sun had set. Taking one of the stones of that place, he put it under his head and lay down in that place. He had a dream. A stairway was set on the ground, and its top reached to the sky. and messengers of God were going up and down it. Standing beside him was God, who said, I am Adonai, the Lord of your father Abraham, and the God of Isaac, and the ground upon which you are lying I will assign to you and your offspring. Your descendants shall be as the dust of the earth. You shall spread out to the west, to the north, to the east, to the south, and all families of the earth shall bless themselves by you and your descendants. Remember, Yaakov, that I am with you. I will protect you wherever you go. I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised. Jacob awoke from his sleep and said, wow, God was in this place and I didn't know it. Achen yesh Adonai b'makom hazeh va'anochi lo yadati. Shaken to his very core, he continued, how awesome is this place? This is none other than the very abode of God, a gateway to heaven. Imagine for a moment that you are Yaakov, waking from that dream, shaken and trembling from the encounter, overwhelmed by feelings of mystery and awe, declaring as he does with the fullness of his soul, this place is none other than the house of God, the gateway to heaven. This moment of encounter is for me, the biblical source for our new name of our community and synagogue, Hamakom, the place. Jacob alone, feeling existential angst in the middle of no place, finds his place in the world when he says, wow, God was in this place and I didn't know it. So what about you? When have you had moments of transcendence in your life? When have you experienced awe? I want to try something with you. I want us to take a couple of minutes, and I want you to turn to somebody next to you, behind you or in front of you, and I want you to take 1 minute, and I want you to share with the person near you one moment of transcendence, one moment of awe, one moment of wonder that you've had in your life. And I want one of you to talk and the other to listen. And then I'm going to look at my watch, which doesn't have a second-hand clock, so I'm going to count to 60. And at a minute, I'm going to ask you to switch and share with the other person your story. So, if you're not sitting near somebody, find somebody right now. 1 minute to share a moment of transcendence and awe. Go! I don't know about you, but I'm glad that we had that opportunity, even if it was for a very short moment, to share with one another our experiences of awe. Because in thinking about them, in sharing them, we get to relive them. And not only we get to relive them, but by sharing them with somebody else, we bring that sense of awe into our hearts and into our community. Your experiences and mine in the Himalayas and Jacob's in the midst of the wilderness are the moments of transcendence that we want to create here in this place that we are calling Hamakom. Now, I imagine it isn't easy to naturally feel the mystery and reverence, the wonder and amazement when we walk into this place, when we sit in this sanctuary to pray. But I also imagine such feelings may be difficult to access in many places. those feelings of awe and surprise, wonderment and reverence. This is not an emotion we often talk about or think about, and yet we all have moments of awe. Ordinary ones, not the birth of a child moment, but the everyday ones. And yet, we are not trained to notice them, to pay attention to them, and we ought to. 40 years ago, Abraham Joshua Heschel, the greatest Jewish prophet of our time, remarks sadly that as civilization advances, the sense of wonder declines. He suggested that such decline is an alarming symptom of our state of mind. Humankind will not perish for want of information, but only for want of appreciation. The beginning of our happiness lies in the understanding that life without wonder is not worth living. What we lack is not a will to believe, but a will to wonder. I saw that lack of a will to wonder in Bob 40 years ago. A guy who had seen it all, done it all, and was going through the motions, who at the age of 30 couldn't take the time to stop and appreciate, to notice, and be in awe of the incredible natural beauty surrounding him or the people he was with. So how do we cultivate? How do we cultivate that feeling of awe? Well, first I think it helps with an explanation, a definition. Merriam-Webster Dictionary offers, awe is an emotion variously combining dread, veneration, and wonder that is inspired by authority or the sacred and sublime. Dr. Keltner, professor of psychology at UC Berkeley and a renowned expert on human emotions, who spent 2 decades studying awe. 2 decades studying awe, and published a book, Awe, The New Science of Everyday Wonder and How It Can Transform Your Life. He defines awe as the feeling of being in the presence of something vast that transcends your current understanding of the world. He offers 8 categories of awe in his book. The first, moral beauty. People's courage and kindness and strength in overcoming great odds. That's his first one. His second, collective effervescence. When we gather to celebrate, commemorate, pray, dance, cheer, and rally. Third, no surprise to many, the feelings we get in our natural surroundings. For 4 through 8, he says music, visual design, stories of spiritual or religious awe, stories of life and death, and finally epiphanies, when we suddenly understand essential truths about life, like, wow, God was in this place and I didn't know it. Now, I don't know about you, but did you hear in your sharing and listening these categories, these 8 categories? Did they come up for any of you? I think they probably did. So why is awe as an emotion so important to us? Well, here's the science. Awe is the single positive emotion that lowers our levels of chronic pro-inflammatory cytokines. I had to look up what a cytokine was. Jerry, can you tell everybody around you what a cytokine is? Chronically elevated levels of these molecules are associated with diabetes, heart disease, and depression. So we need to keep cytokines low, and awe does that. It also triggers the release of oxytocin and dopamine, those feel-good and stress-releasing hormones. It stimulates the vagus nerve response, calling millions of our cells to work together to enable us to feel more open and calmer. So yes, awe is hugely important to our physical health. But not just our physical well-being, so too our moral well-being. Of the many emotions studied, awe is one of the few that regularly points us towards the other. Where many emotions are about self-preservation or helping us minimize dangers while advancing competitive gains, awe works quite differently. Awe, in the words of Keltner, quiets the nagging, self-critical, overbearing, status-conscious voice of ourself or ego and empowers us to collaborate, to open our minds to wonders, and to see the deep patterns of life. Awe brings us joy, meaning, creative minds, and community. Awe orients us towards others. With awe, we devote ourselves to things outside ourselves, to sacrifice and to serve, to sense the boundaries between our individual selves and others, showing that our true nature is collective. Which brings me back to Hamakom and our patriarch Jacob. Before his encounter with God, Yaakov, well, let's just say Yaakov was full of Jacob, self-absorbed, self-centered, doing whatever was necessary to get him ahead, even if it meant tricking his father and alienating his brother. And then he experiences this moment of God. And what story in our Torah immediately follows? Jacob finds himself at a well surrounded by women standing around waiting to water their flock. They can't because there's a huge stone on top of the well. So Jacob, with Herculean strength, removes that rock, waters the flocks of these women, and one woman in particular, Rachel, with whom he immediately falls in love. Transformed by his earlier experience, Jacob for the first time reaches outward, taking care of the needs of others and not his own, connecting with emotions of compassion and wonderment and love. As the Torah says twice, Jacob kissed Rachel and then Laban and broke into tears. The Torah is suggesting that a single encounter with awe in a moment of existential angst can alter our lives for the better. Add to this very individual encounter with awe, the Torah provides with an example of awe in the collective. As a whole, an entire community of people who can forever be transformed from a moment of transcendence. And that moment is Mount Sinai. Amidst the thunder and lightning and the first ever blast of the shofar, God descends the mountain and reveals God's self to the Jewish people. Here, awe is experienced as a response to the miraculous both in nature and to God's revelation. And this Torah that is created is filled with expressions of ethical and moral guidance, reflecting Keltner's very first category of awe, moral beauty. A guiding path for us individually and collectively to build a holy, moral, upright society which honors all creation and requires love of self, others, and God. Hamakom is the place where we can transform the experience of Sinai, the awe-inducing moment of revelation, into everyday practice. Our entire tradition is built on such a premise of turning the ordinary into the extraordinary, of taking a mundane or regular act or moment and of elevating it. The whole notion of blessings, of Sena Bracha, is to help us feel in that moment a sense of wonder. But a small example. Before we eat bread, what are we supposed to do? We wash our hands. Why do we wash our hands? We say, Al nitilat yadayim, which doesn't mean thank you for washing our hands. Al nitilat yadayim, to raise and elevate our hands. Think about our hands. Closed, they make fists with knuckles pointing outwards. Describing what? A sense of miserliness, meagerliness, or anger. Open with the softness of our palms, they represent compassion and giving and caring. Poteach et yadecha umaspeh lo'ochai ratzon. Before we eat bread, we take a moment to recognize the power in our hands to create a moment of awe and wonder for another. Every single bracha is a magnifying glass to see more closely the power and possibility of awe. But let me share a couple of examples of how awe can play out in a community. And the first one I want to share is personal. My last days of saying Kaddish for my father happened to be the very first Sunday in July, a time when few people come to our daily minyan. I learned after the fact that members of this community made calls days before to ensure that there would be at least 9 others present so that I can say Kaddish. Keltner calls this behavior saintly tendencies. We might call them Kodesh moments, moments of sacrifice, putting aside self-interest in favor of serving another. This is awe in the simplest yet finest form. Minyan in particular is one of those ways we exemplify Keltner's awe experiences as moral beauty. The self-sacrificing nature of those who show up daily for others, minimizing their own ego, replacing their I need to do this, I need to sleep more, I can't give up this time, for the we of communal obligation. Here, awe awakens the better angels of our nature. During COVID, there was a congregant in her 90s without family living close by and afraid of leaving her house. So another congregant volunteered regularly to shop for her and take care of other errands for her, visited her outside her place so that she wouldn't feel the loneliness of COVID. In this moment, a community was created and awe was experienced. More recently, many of our members who have for years volunteered in our kitchen on Shabbat, preparing lunch, were saddened when told that their services were not needed on the South Campus. Now, while you would think that our members would jump at the chance of not having to make lunch, it was in fact the opposite. Why? Well, studies on awe found that some of our greatest experiences of wonder and awe happen in moments of collective effervescence. Coined by the pioneering sociologist Emil Durkheim to describe the sense of energy and harmony people feel when they come together in a group around a shared purpose. Collective effervescence is the synchrony you feel when you dance together on Simchat Torah or at a wedding. When we root for our favorite team, the 49ers. Or when we all stand silently together, moved by the sounding of the shofar tomorrow morning. During this pandemic, it was absent from our lives, but in the kitchen on Shabbat morning, it is palpably present. Because preparing lunch not only creates indispensable camaraderie, but a sense of holy purpose in doing for the community. So since August, we have once again brought in volunteers to help prepare Shabbat lunch. And what about in life cycle? A friend recently shared with me an awe-inspiring moment for him at his father's funeral. His 5-year-old cousin turned to him after the burial and said, "Now that Uncle George is gone, are you going to feel alone?" This question, he said, penetrated his existential experience. It opened his heart to the loneliness that we experience upon losing a loved one. For him, it was a moment of awe that a child could so articulate out loud what he was feeling. Awe is the emotion that moves us to devote ourselves to others, to sacrifice and to serve, to sense the insignificant boundaries between our individual selves and others, showing that our true nature is collective. That is the purpose of our faith, of our religious nature, to inspire, to elevate, and to cause us to wonder. As Heschel so eloquently challenged us, it is not utility that we seek in religion, but eternity. The purpose of religion is not to satisfy the needs we feel, but to create in us the need of serving ends, of which we otherwise remain oblivious. This emotion of awe is not out of reach of any of us. And on these Yamim Noraim, these days of awe, this emotion may be closer. We just need to be aware of its power, its ability to rekindle in us a deeper awareness and connection of what's important. Hamakom, God's name. Hamakom, a place for the possibility of awe. Hamakom, a place to connect with others and bring awe into our lives and each other's lives. Hamakom, a place to bring God in to dwell in our midst. Remember that friend that I began with this sermon? That same friend whose son asked the question of awe when he was 8 years old. This friend's other son died of brain cancer a few years ago. And recently, her younger brother was visiting and approached her apprehensively, saying, "I've had a question long on my mind that I want to ask you, but I haven't asked it because I'm not sure that it might hurt you." She said, "Ask it." And he said, "After your son's death, how do you get up in the morning each day to live your life?" And her response, "Many mornings it is incredibly difficult to get up, but I always do, because there is so much beauty and so much awe in the world, and I don't want to miss it." Friends, there is no shortage of pain in this world, but there is also so much awe, naturally and humanly created. On this day of awe, celebrating the creation of the world, symbolizing our ability, like God, to create anew, may we find such moments of awe for ourselves and each other. May we initiate those moments in the lives of our family and in the lives of this new community as we say, Amen. Shabbat Shalom and Shana Tova.